It's time for our second episode of Quick Column Quilts. Substitute the traditional quilt block with a column or strip of fabric. The first quilt of the day is called Tumbling Tumblers. Take a speedy approach to this time-honored quilt block by rotating the shape 90 degrees to create columns, not rows. Turn what was traditional into modern. Quick Column Quilts, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, making a difference in sewing, quilting, crafting, and needle arts for over 30 years. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
A traditional tumbler quilt has the template going in this direction with horizontal rows in lieu of vertical columns. Usually there's only one size of tumbler per quilt, but here we've used 4 different sizes, 4, 6, and 8-inch tumbler sizes. And here's the largest, the 10-inch. I think this is the 2, this would be the 8, and the 4 is at the other end, separated by columns of the background color. The interesting use of negative space, or that green background showing up in the column, is because I put several of the tumblers of the same color in succession. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but here are the tumbler shapes that create that interesting negative space so that the tumblers look obviously like they're tumbling down the quilt. The color choices, I spent a lot of time figuring out what colors to use. Again, it's kind of a modern style, but we use the pastels and then just with a hint of some contrasting pops of color, the orange and the plum. Use sparingly. If you used it too much, it would be a little bit too overpowering. One thing about this quilt is that when you're making it, large or small, you need to audition the fabric. And when my staff and I were making this, we many times took colors out, put them in. It took a little bit of auditioning. So don't be surprised if you find that you have to go shopping to buy different fabric. So let's talk about the templates, how to trace on the fabric. I mentioned there are 4 sizes of templates that I used, 4, 6, 8, and 10, and you can print these off, or often you may find them at your favorite fabric store. You may have them in your stash. Or I have a template that I'm going to use that has all 4 sizes nestled in one template. And that tells you on this template how long to cut a crosswise strip. So crosswise strips, you're going to cut, for the one I'm working with is going to be a 6-inch, and it says on here to cut 6.5 inch. You just measure the length, of course, of the tumbler, or do what the pattern or the template tells you. And I have a piece of fabric here, and as we did in the first program, I really recommend to use a spray starch or a spray starch alternative. You do a little bit more than I'm showing you right now, but it gives the fabric some crispness to allow you to really work with the fabric and not have it bend out of shape. So now to do some tracing with a fine point marker, you put the template on the fabric, aligning the edges, and trace. And then rotate the template, align it on the previously traced line, so that you're not wasting fabric, and you keep on keeping on. I think you get the idea of how this works. After you've traced the entire length, which I'm not doing right now, but just part of it, then you're going to do some cutting. And I'll look for my ruler, which is right here. Make sure the fabric is aligned. You could cut several layers at once, not just one layer at a time, and cut out the tumblers. Pretty simple, and you're going to do a fair amount of cutting. So cut away until you have lots of tumblers and cut out. Now I have on the side of my board the 4 sizes, and now you do some layouts. We started with one column, and I'll start with the very smallest, the 2-inch column, and I'll put several of the background color next to each other, And then, here we go, it goes like this. And then start playing with color. Again, it will not just be a one-shot wonder here. You're going to experiment with what colors look best next to each other and just keep laying out the colors. Start with one column and then do some pinning to put the pieces together. Now, because they are not straight edges, you will have to offset the little edges by 1/4 of an inch. And I just have a 1/4 of an inch marking on this particular, here we'll just do it this way, it's a 1/4 of an inch. And I'll be starting to sew in that V of the template or of the fabric, and then I'd place another piece right sides together and again have that overlap a 1/4 of an inch. After a while you'll get accustomed to knowing what a 1/4 of an inch looks like, and then keep pinning and overlapping and offsetting it by a 1/4 of an inch. This one is really off. I can kind of tell that. We'll check on the other end, and you just pin the entire row. Now you're going to be doing this for each of the columns, but I generally start with one column at a time. And now I'll show you the tips on how to sew the tumblers together. I have my mini column pinned together and going to double check again that I have a 1/4 of an inch seam. The dip in the V is a 1/4 of an inch. On my sewing machine, I placed a patchwork or a quilting presser foot that has a 1/4 of an inch extension along the side. And when I raise the presser foot and line the fabric along the edge of the fabric, then I can just sew that 1/4 of an inch seam. And as we get to the very end, sometimes you got to do a little adjusting as you're stitching, but as I get to this V-shaped point, I'm coming right out of that V shape. Cut your threads and you're ready to stitch the next seam. And then you just would move on to the next one and sew again a 1/4 of an inch seam. Another option would be to pair up your your tumbler shapes. This would kind of negate doing that little layout design, but you could place two together and sew them. And as I'm coming down the stretch, I wouldn't cut the threads, but then place another pair and start to stitch. Then after sewing pairs together, then you could certainly lay out the design. This is just a little faster than always cutting the thread. So you have two options. You can decide what you'd like to do. Pressing is next, and press the seam flat, then press it to one side or press it open. I have some larger shapes right here, and I'm going to press it flat first. Just let me get it right here. Just the way I stitched it, I would do the pressing and then press it open. Just the way I recommend in garment sewing. You press it flat and then press to one side, alternating your directions. Another option is to then set the seam with a wooden clapper, tailor clapper. You don't have to pound it like I used to do. You just press it so that the moisture comes up through the wood and you get a very sharp crease. Now in this particular fabric, we have a lot of light colors and dark colors. And if you press the seam to the light color, you might get the show through. So this seam has been pressed flat, and then I'll press it open. I'm doing this more and more in quilting, pressing open seams, something that I really didn't do in my early years of quilting, and that having a lot of steam in there, and then just depress a wooden block so that the moisture goes up through this area. And you'll find that you'll have nice seams and really set fine without having little bubbles or tucks. Now because we had that 1/4 of an inch seam extended, you'll find that the edges are very straight, relatively straight. You know, you may get a little hiccup like this, but that's pretty common. And in this particular panel, I press the seams in alternating directions. But again, if you have light colors next to dark colors, do that press open of the seams. So, make columns by sewing with 1/4 of an inch seam allowances. Press with plenty of steam. Set the seams by depressing with the clapper, and you'll have great columns. And now I'll show you how to lay them out for a nice design. As you just saw, the stitching and the pressing of the tumbler shapes is really easy. The decisions that are important to make are the placement of the color, the width of the columns, which one will go next to which, and that's what we're going to do now. Here, I think this looks about like a 6-inch column to me, and we have 2 of the background colors back to back. And then we would put another column down and separate them by the narrow columns. And if we look back at the quilt, I'll tell you the widths that I used. Here's that large 10-inch tumbler. Next to it is a 4.5-inch narrow quilt. The very smallest 4-inch tumbler. This is 2.5 inches. Really, I just made this up. You could choose any size that you'd like. Here's a 3.5, and then by that narrow 2.5-inch tumbler. We have 7 tumbler columns, and we have 8 narrow columns, and then you just lay it out. And what you'll find that we did, that sometimes we had to take out a seam or flip a column around to make sure that that looked good together. Now, maybe I wouldn't want all this pink next to that pink, so I kind of liked it better this way. So it will be a very visual decision in this particular case. Then you'll meet right sides together to sew the tumbling columns to the narrow columns. Here is what you'll do next to trim. Because we have 4, 8, 6, and 10, how did I say that? 4, 6, 8, and 10, that's better, columns or tumblers, the tops will not be even. They'll never come out even because of the shape. So you're going to have these tumbler columns a little bit longer. After you sew them to the narrow columns, then square your quilt. This is a very large quilt. It's fun to work with, so you're going to have lots of different pieces. And you can see here the visual presentation is fun to work with, just playing and seeing which columns you'd like next to each other. And each of us who makes this quilt will have a very different layout, a very different look. Sue, a professional long arm quilter, did the quilting for me, and that's something that I'm not very talented at, so you may not be either. You may want to consider finding a long arm quilter to do these great circles, the starburst. It just kind of makes this quilt come alive. So if you're interested in working with a tumbler, but rather than having them horizontal rows, you can easily put them in vertical lines for a column quilt that has a lot of impact. At first glance, hexagon shapes cause many quilters to think, oh no, the dreaded Y-seam. Not so with this speedy column quilt design. The hexagon shapes are created with 2 halves, eliminated the intersection of 3 seams, otherwise known as Y-seams. With this technique, faux hexagon halves are stitched in columns with relative speed and ease. You don't always have to make a quilt. A table runner is considered it's quilting as well. You have 3 layers of fabric, a top, batting, and backing, and I like small projects as well as large projects. And with this table runner, we chose obviously a neutral for the background. Looks like hexagons, but they're 2 pieces that have been put together because there's a seam right down the middle. That's why you can get the half of a hexagon. And I'm going to show you how to piece these together because you're not going to end up with this dreaded Y-seam, which normally you have a difficult time getting everything to meet right in the middle. Instead, it'll all be sewn with straight stitches. You can modify your hexagon templates that you have at home. We just traced these on poster board. Here's the hexagon shape. We cut it exactly down the middle and then added a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. This will be the shape that we're going to be using. This is a 4-inch hexagon shape. Then you could also use, or I should say, a template that has half hexagons in it, and here's the 4-inch size. Much like the tumbling tumblers, you're going to cut crosswise strips of fabric, press it with starch or a starch alternative, and then do the tracing. And I have some shapes already cut here, and if you got it before, you'll get it again because this is really pretty simple. And I'll just align the edges with the edge of the fabric and the template and trace, and then trace the other side, excuse me. Then rotate and line up your previous tracing, trace the other side, and you get it. It's pretty simple. You could stack many layers together, and then after stacking many, being 3 to 4, not 8 to 10, then you cut along your lines. Use a fine point marker so that you get it as accurate as possible. And I have 2 layers of this fabric stacked. In the instructions that accompany today's program will show you exactly the exact number to cut if you want to make this table runner just the size and all the dimensions for the quilts and quilt projects that we're showing. We're going to do a visual layout again. And the visual layout is going to include end pieces. And if you're wondering what I mean by end pieces, on the template that I have, there are end pieces that square off the columns, which makes it quite a bit easier to get everything exact. On this template, there's a finishing piece or an end piece, and you would trace this on the background fabric. If you can just make believe this is the background fabric, because I ran out of gray fabric. We use so much fabric for this program that, you can see that here's an end piece. Then you flip it around so that we're just kind of making believe this is gray. And I think you've done that before. So you can see these funny shapes, and you have to do twist and turn so that you get a straight edge and then an angled edge. And again, of the background fabric, you'd cut double the number that you'd need for the columns that you have. So if you're having 6 columns, you'd need 12 pieces or 12 end pieces. Then do some layouts. And here I have a layout that I'm going to start with. Here's an end piece, followed by a half hexagon. We call this hit and miss hexagon table runner. And here we go, like this. And you'd lay out your entire table runner. Then, as before, you're going to do some pinning together. So I'm meeting right sides together, overlap the 2, and then have that little kitty ear extend that 1/4 of an inch. And make sure it's about a 1/4 of an inch, and pin these 2 layers together. And you pin the whole column, down the whole column, all the pieces, meet right sides together, align them, make sure it's, you'll get very good at guessing at a 1/4 of an inch, pin, and then meet right sides together. You got it, how that goes together. And here again, I'm stitching that seam, starting in the V shape of that seam and just doing those quick little seams. Then you can press the seams as we did before and start laying out just the way you had it with the individual pieces, but now you have the columns sewn. This last step is really important because you have these finishing edges that allows you to align these edges as you put the pieces together. And you can see here I use that option of pressing the seams open. And then if you align the edges and you align those little kitty ears at the end, you'll be able to get a pinpoint accurate seam where the pin goes right through the other side, so that after I sew this together, everything will line up right at that Y seam. Sew the columns together, put batting and backing, have a friend do the quilting if you'd like, or you could do the quilting yourself, and you have a speedy column quilt design as a table runner. A minimal amount of sewing time can make a huge impact in another person's life. Today's Nancy's Corner guest is here to share why and how she developed Pretty Pockets. Please welcome Marianne Arthur, who joins us via Skype from Maryland. Good to see you, Marianne.
Good to see you, Nancy. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on your show and to share our story of Pretty Pockets.
You're welcome. You have an interesting story. It didn't start out with just the best circumstances. Explain to our viewers your experience and then how you developed Pretty Pockets.
Sure. Thank you very much. In March of 2011, I had breast cancer surgery, and when I came out of surgery, I was flanked by 4 drain tubes and bulbs, 2 on each side of my body. And I do have a sample of a drain tube that I'd like to show you. About 6 inches of the tube goes into your body, and the rest of the tube and the bulb dangle at your sides and hang down past your waist. As you can imagine, these were heavy.
Sure.
And they filled with fluid, and they were very painful against raw skin. So my ingenious partner, Anne-Marie Marrow, ripped apart a pair of our daughter's pajamas and covered the bulbs with each leg of the pajamas. So from there, I wore the drain bulb covers for the duration of my recovery. And a few days after my surgery, I went into my doctor's office for a checkup at the University of Maryland St. Joseph's Medical Center, and another patient was in the waiting room. She had the exact same drain bulbs, but she had taken all 4 of her drain bulbs and corralled them together in a brown paper bag and stapled that bag to her waistband. So I came right home that day and actually cut out and designed the pocket as a hip, soft, wonderful way to corral drain bulbs. And the hitches, I'm actually not a sewer. So I recruited Anne-Marie to sew 2 pockets for me. She put them together, and we delivered them the very next day to Miss Joan at the hospital. She loved them, the folks at the hospital loved them, and we began production at home.
In Pretty Pockets, obviously you don't make a penny about this. You donate all of your time and your energies and spreading the word of these Pretty Pockets. They're made of nice flannel. They're soft. You just pin them into place.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, when we were talking about this earlier, you were mentioning since 2011, you've had a lot of contacts. And tell our viewers what it's kind of monumental today as far as this outreach today happens.
It is phenomenal. I cannot tell you how wonderful this story has become. From the very beginning in my home to over 500 people who have contacted me in the last 4 months to receive a copy of the pattern. And there were so many integral people who stitched the story of the pockets along the way. And I'd love to be able to highlight a few of them if that would be okay.
Sure, of course.
Sure. Well, beginning at home, my partner Anne-Marie Marrow came up with the idea of actually covering the bulbs. And then her mother, Judy Marrow, is a very avid sewer and quilter. And she, for the last 2 years, has cut and sewn and produced hundreds and hundreds of pockets that we've distributed. She made a contact for me at the Joann's Fabric store locally with Regina Berry, the sewing manager there. Regina has hosted several sew-ins over the course of the last 2 years. The sew-ins were picked up by a media newsletter here at home called The Patch. And from The Patch in Baltimore, a woman in Florida read the article online. Her name is Rob Newton, and she runs an online embroidery newsletter for a company called Designs by Sick. And she contacted me personally by phone and asked if she could rerun my story and promote Pretty Pockets as a giving project to her 30,000 people on her newsletter list.
Wow.
So it's amazing. 500 of those people have contacted me personally, and one of them, named Debbie Wright, referred me to you.
Well, it's great combination, like the connecting of the dots. I'm glad we can give it to other people as well. Now, not only are Pretty Pockets used by breast cancer survivors, but other people. And you've told me it's all kinds of surgeries.
Yes, that is very true. Originally, I was promoting it, and even my gift tag says that it's a free gift for breast cancer patients. But the more people who contacted me, they were asking me if they could modify the pattern for other types of surgery. And some of the drain bulbs are different sizes.
Sure.
So folks have taken the pattern and designed whatever they needed to accommodate friends and family members in need.
So they can just be pinned to your clothes. They don't have to be stapled or placed into a paper bag. And you can make them in fun colors. And you put a message with them, too.
I do have my message on my tag reads, a discreet and spirited way to secure post-surgical drains.
Oh, it's a charming story. I thank you. And I'm like to report to our audience that your surgery was in 2011. And,
yes, that's correct.
And now you're cancer-free.
I am cancer-free, yes, thankfully.
And that's great news. Well, Marianne, this was charming, and we will direct our viewers to our website at nancyzieman.com, where they can click on Nancy's Corner and view your introduction and go to your website. And it's a free pattern, right?
It is a free pattern, and I saved it in a PDF format so people can just download it easily. I even saved a template, so all you have to do is cut the template out and trace the fabric over top of that. It's very easy to do, and feel free to modify the pattern according to your own needs. Share it with your friends. Don't keep it a secret.
Okay.
And please remember this project in the future, because there's such a need for it with so many people having surgery that it's not just for one time a year. Throw all those fabric scraps into a tub and create pretty pockets.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for watching at home. Bye for now.
Nancy Zieman has written a book entitled Quick Column Quilts that includes instructions for 13 quilted projects and all the techniques featured in this 3-part series. It's $18.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2804. Order item number U8743, Quick Column Quilts. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Pellon. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.